The NBA regular season is here. It's game week, people. On today's Locked On NBA, we'll preview Knicks versus Celtics and Wolves Lakers. Plus, we're going to tell you teams that need to make a trade right now. Not later, right now. All that and more today on Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA, your daily source for all things NBA from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us. Glad to have you on board. It is NBA opening week. I'm so excited to have games back. We're going to break them down today on today's show. In the last segment, we're actually going to get some trade talk. We're going to talk about what teams need to make trades right now, not tomorrow, not down the line, not the deadline, right now. Plus, we'll get into the games. We're going to talk about Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves taking on the Los Angeles Lakers. Will Bronny James score his first NBA points? All that and more on today's show. I want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name's Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network. I'm co-host of Locked On Nuggets. I'm joined by David Ramil. He's co-host of Locked On Heat. David, are you excited to have NBA games back in our lives?
Yes.
Great stuff, David. All right, we're going to start with a breakdown of Knicks and Celtics. Obviously, it's a battle of the two biggest forces kind of in the Eastern Conference, at least by the odds. I think the Sixers are probably in that conversation as well. I'm really fascinated by this game from the standpoint of the Knicks were very clearly built to beat this team. They added Mikal Bridges for another wing defender, and they had Karl-Anthony Towns as a 5-out set option at center. This is very different from the team that the Knicks were last season. They did go 1-3 versus the Celtics last year. David, what's the biggest thing you're going to be looking forward to in this game, and what are you kind of really interested to see in this game?
Well, aside from the overall matchup of two great teams in the Eastern Conference, I'm curious to see the attitude with which Boston handles this. I'm pretty confident that Joe Mazzulla, being the kind of guy that he is, and understanding these sort of micro trials that take place over the course of the regular season, he's going to have his team engaged and ready. My overall concern with the Celtics, if there is one, aside from the talent, obviously they had a great season last year. They won the championship, et cetera. That's no longer important because that's in the rearview mirror. It's how they kind of move forward without that perceived slight, the chip on the shoulder that they used over the last couple of seasons of being written off, of being discounted, of Jason Tatum not being a top 5-10 player, all these kinds of things that they've used to motivate them throughout the years. Well, none of that really matters anymore because they've proven themselves. They've won a championship. So what's next? How do they find the way to kind of go through the grind, missing Kristaps Porzingis with a team that does have some questions about them, and whether or not they can look at this challenger in the New York Knicks and say, no, we're not ready to relinquish this throne. We just got here. We're not ready to give it up anytime soon. And whether or not they kind of handle it with a sort of focus that you would expect from a champion level team. So that's what I'm looking at more than anything else.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? And like Banner Knight's obviously emotional. This is the first title for this group. Drew's gotten it. It's like Drew knows the deal. But the rest of this team, like this is their first championship. And so there's going to be a lot of nerves, I think, just from the emotions of it. I've covered these events before. Now, in recent years, the teams that gets the ring has actually done very, very well on these opening night games. We've seen a lot of success for those teams. However, I do think that there's like a lot of this is a very interesting spot for the Celtics to be in, but the crowd should be great. You know, from the Knicks perspective, I think there's a little bit of pressure here. If you're the Knicks, you've rebuilt this team, you added Mikal Bridges, you added Karl-Anthony Towns, you broke up like the purity of last season's Nova Knicks and all the hustle and heart that they brought to the table, and you're trying to really compete. This is the team that you're trying to compete against. This is the team that you've seen built best to beat. Now, I have concerns about building your team to beat one squad because you have to face others in the playoffs. But outside of that, like that puts more pressure on opening night of you don't have to win this game, but you need to be able to show that you can scare them, that you can match up, that you can threaten them. Like if they get blown out in this game, that would be a pretty big bummer. It's not the end of the world. It's the first game of the season. Everybody's going to look rusty the first month of the season. But I do think that they're, as much as it's like, oh, the Celtics are getting the ring, I think that all the pressure here is on New York on the road to beat the champs and show that they're ready to compete here.
Look, I've been covering the Heat for a while, obviously, but this was years ago when I was a fan in 2006, the 06-07 season, the opening night ceremony versus the young Chicago Bulls, Tyson Chandler, Eddie Curry. They came to Miami fresh off their 2006 championship against the Dallas Mavericks and just mollywopped them. They just absolutely destroyed. I think they wound up winning by like 40 something points. And that kind of set the tone for the rest of the season. Maybe it was a one and done type deal in which they were able to win that 06 championship. And obviously, Dwayne Wade had a fantastic finals. But they just, it really set a tone. And I became a big, firm believer in understanding, look, you want to set a kind of understanding of what you want to accomplish for the rest of the season. Do you want it to just be an uphill grind? Do you have enough on this roster to be able to compete? So I'm looking at this and I want to really see how Boston responds. But yeah, from the New York Knicks standpoint, this is such an important. It's not a make it or break it, like you said, but you want to be able to create a tone for your attitude for the rest of the season. You want to be able to say we can compete with these top teams. It's important for us to be able to say that we will be a challenger, that we believe that, and we can prove it, not just in October, but in April when the team's banged up and they've got injuries and maybe the fit with Karl Anthony Towns doesn't work out as well, or who knows, all the questions that could possibly come up over the course of the season. They want to be able to at least have a foundation of we've got this. We've got good vibes. We believe in one another, and we know that we can compete at a high level.
No Kristaps Porzingis for the Celtics. He'll miss this game as he continues his rehabilitation from injury. So I again, this is Karl Anthony Towns, who didn't ask to be traded in a new environment. Now the pick and roll with Brunson, I think, is going to be really tough to stop. It was looked really good in preseason. I'll be curious to see how much Al Horford kind of spends time on him, if he's like the full-time guy, or if he, if they go to Xavier Tillman a little bit more. I think that'll be really interesting. Knicks aren't a deep team, right? And so I am going to be really curious to see how Tibbs approaches this. Like, is Tibbs going to go to like a playoff 7-man rotation here to try and get the win? Like, it is kind of interesting because the Celtics are just going to play their normal rotation. It's going to be Peyton Pritchard. It's going to be Luke Cornett. It's going to be Sam Hauser. Like, you're going to see those, but also a lot of 3-point shooting on both of these teams when you look at it. But with the addition of Cat, when you got Mikal Bridges, there's just like a lot of shooters. I'm curious about like how all this is going to look. A lot of switching you're going to see in this game. So I'm curious if it's going to be high or low scoring, because I think you're going to see a lot of switching, which usually drags games down, but it's also a 3-point shootout. So it could be a lot of ugly 3-point shooting so that the score looks higher than the game felt in terms of flow. Interested on that as well.
Who leads the game in scoring?
Ooh. Tatum last season shot 27% versus the Knicks against the top matchups that he played against. I'm actually going to say Jaylen Brown. I think Jaylen Brown picks up where he left off from winning Finals MVP, and Jaylen Brown here goes for 30 plus, and the Celtics get the win. You got a prediction?
I think Jalen Brunson leads both teams in scoring, but I think the Celtics do wind up winning because they'll just overpower him. I'm also curious to see whether or not Brunson winds up playing close to 40 minutes a game. That might be a little out of reach, but we've seen this kind of performance from Tibbs in the past, so I'm curious to see if it winds up doing that on opening night. But man, that would be something else to really set that tone early on.
Yeah, don't threaten Tibbs with a good time about playing his starters 40 minutes in the first game. All right, up next, Anthony Edwards is maybe the new face of the league, or at least the league wants him to be. He's taken on the longtime face of the league in LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and the Los Angeles Lakers with their new coach. Can the Lake Show get off on the right foot, or are the Wolves going to howl on opening night? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On NBA. Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's something that scares you? It's Halloween time, obviously, time for spooks and these types of things. My little girl is always saying, we don't want really spooky, we want fun spooky, which is the difference between the Halloween decorations I want to put up and the Halloween decorations she wants to put up. But, I think everyone deals with fear. Everybody's worried about things. We're in a really perilous time. I think everybody's worried about something right now and afraid of something. For me, a lot of it is as when you're a father and you're a husband and all these types of things, you tend to start worrying about making sure that you're doing right by them and taking care of them. You're supposed to provide to whatever degree that your relationship is set up to do so. And so I want to be there for mine. You never want to let them down. Therapy is a great tool for facing your fears and finding ways to overcome them, because sometimes the scariest thing is not facing our fears in the first place and holding ourselves back. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Second segment here on Locked On NBA with David Ramil. I'm Matt Moore. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us. Make sure to check out Locked On Heat and Locked On Nuggets and Locked On Celtics and Locked On Knicks and Locked On Wolves and all of the Locked On podcasts as well. Also, make sure we have new team newsletters for your favorite team. So make sure to check that out. Locked On Heat's got one. Locked On Nuggets has one. All of our shows have one now. It's a one-stop for your ultimate team and league coverage, delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free right now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On NBA newsletter. All right, David. So we talked about this when the schedule was announced that, hey, Anthony Edwards is on opening night. Like, they're the marquee team on opening night. It's not the defending Western Conference champion, the Mavericks with Luka Doncic. It's not the 2023 champs with the Nuggets or even the Thunder projected to be number one. It's this Wolves team. I'm really interested to see how this game plays out. They're taking on the Lakers in LA. Big, the Lake show under the bright lights. What are your kind of expectations as the Wolves take on the Lakers in their first game?
I'm just looking at how Minnesota incorporates Julius Randle. I think, they were such a great team last year, such a defensive juggernaut, really exciting to watch. And I don't think a lot of people expect them to be as good as they were last year. And now, kind of building off that without Karl Anthony Towns, that's a huge loss. But you were really bullish, as we talked last week, about the addition of Dante DiVincenzo. What's he going to add to the table? It's so much for the Wolves, and or have a lot of questions. But the star of the show, and rightfully so, is Anthony Edwards, and how he responds. This is a big moment for him to go up against his former teammate with USA Basketball. Opening night, I don't know that he's had this opportunity previously, and so for him, if he wants to embrace that role. And this is fresh off his recent comments that he might go join the NBA if he was able to the NFL, if he's able to win a title at some point within the next few years. And I'd like to get your thoughts on that, because it's a curious thing to say right before the season starts. But this is him going out there and proving to a large national audience that he can be the face of the NBA, that he is one of those players that deserves that kind of attention. So how he responds, how Julius responds, so many questions about that roster and whether or not they match up. That's not to take away from the Lakers. I mean, the Lakers are a team worth watching, if nothing else, because LeBron James and Anthony Davis are still really good. How does JJ Redick respond in his first actual regular season coaching job? Like, there's so many different things that are going to be key factors to play out over the course of this game. It's a really fun matchup, to be honest with you. I really like it. I'm curious to see. I think this will be a pretty evenly played out game. And I don't know who's going to win. I don't have a prediction necessarily, but it's fun. It looks like a fun matchup on paper between these big names that represent in many ways the future and the past of the NBA.
I like Minnesota. I think the offense is going to be better, not just because of DiVincenzo. I just think that they'll probably have a little bit of an edge in this one, if nothing else, just with 3-point volume, just kicking up more threes. The Lakers sometimes have a problem with that. For me, I think a lot of the interesting part with the Lakers is the internal improvement here is. Yeah. Okay, they're banking a lot on internal improvement. They want, like, Max Christie. They're getting Rui Hachimura, like, back when he was injured to start last season. That lineup has been very good together. They believe in some of the young guys, right? Dalton Connect obviously having a big game in this last preseason game, and there's a lot of hype about him. So, like, can they get enough internal improvement where they look different versus this Wolves team? Because it's a small backcourt that has trouble defending. Now, I think what's also kind of interesting is, the Wolves don't really have a matchup for LeBron. Ant's too small. Jaden McDaniels is too slight. He has real problems with big guys. That's why he struggled versus Luka Doncic. He doesn't really thrive in that type of environment. You don't want Julius Randle, I don't think, checking LeBron. Don't think that's a good idea, even with Gobert behind him. So that's, I think, going to be like an interesting kind of matchup here because Gobert does have to handle AD. There's been a lot of talk about AD shooting more threes. It's been an emphasis from Redick. I think that's a really interesting question here because if you are able to space out Rudy Gobert, now all of a sudden the Wolves' interior defense is not nearly as strong. Cat is just a better defensive player than Randall is. Cat wasn't great, but he's a better defensive player than Randall is. And if you don't really have the ability to stop the perimeter attack from LeBron, all right, what does this look like? Like, I like the perimeter matchup in terms of Mike Conley, DiVincenzo, Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker versus Austin Reeves and D'Lo. But when we get into the wings, that's where I think the Lakers might have a little bit of advantage. So, the bench minutes I think are going to be interesting to kind of track in this one and give the Wolves the advantage there. I think the Wolves probably wind up winning this game. I think they should win this game. But I think it's a really fascinating matchup. For you, I guess like one of the big questions I think here is we kind of talked about pressure in that first game of, hey, the Knicks really kind of need to show that they can do this. For the Lakers, I think the stakes are lower in this one for both teams.
Yeah.
Neither one, were in the finals last year. Lakers were a play-in team. I think Minnesota, because they revamped things with that cat trade, the fans will grumble if they lose this one, especially if they don't look good. So I think probably if I was going to say where the pressure is for this game, I definitely probably put it on the Wolves here.
Oh, yeah, I agree 100%. The Lakers and LeBron James, like we've seen him not necessarily punt whole seasons, but large swaths of time over the course of the season because, well, he knows that ultimately it's your performance in the postseason that makes the difference, and you can still go and catapult that into a deep playoff run. Well, maybe not as deep at this current age, but he's always been a believer in the ability to kind of flip the switch, and who knows what can happen in the playoffs. I just think that when you look at one game out of 82. That's not nearly a priority at this stage in his career. He'd like to win one, I think, in front of the home fans, but that's also not a guarantee. So I think the Wolves have a bigger chip on their shoulder going into this matchup. They want to be able to prove that they're one of those teams to watch, that despite the trade, they're as good as ever, et cetera. So I think they'll definitely be much more motivated to come out with a victory there. But although I do predict AD will probably lead both teams in scoring.
Okay. All right. The most important question. Is Bronny James going to score in this game?
Yes, he will.
Oh, okay. So you think it's a blowout? is what you think? So.
One way or the other, it might be. I don't know. It's like if he plays, I think he'll get an opportunity to score, but there's a good chance he probably won't play. Right? I guess if it's an even game.
Imagine the story if like Bronny came in and had like 9 points. I've just imagined like the headlines. It would be.
I don't know if you're just poking the bear at this point. Like, I mean, we keep talking about it, and like, the poor guys have been under this ridiculous level of scrutiny, and I know some of it is not self-imposed, but the nature of being LeBron James' son and playing for his dad's team, basically, and all these different things. But I'd like to see him succeed. I think you do too. I at the same time, I think he's also not as good a player as others out there.
One, you are more ethical and morally responsible than I am. Two, the people love Bronny, and they're like, the interest in him is super high. Just because I don't understand it doesn't mean that I reject it. I'm a man of the people, David, and if the people want to talk about Bronny, I'll talk about Bronny, and I don't think Bronny scores in this game. On the other side, Trey Murphy agreed to a big extension with the Pelicans, but the bigger question I have is, when are the Pelicans going to make a trade? And who are the other teams that need to make a trade right now as the season gets underway? We'll talk about that up next here on Locked On NBA. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Had an okay day yesterday betting NFL, not great, but I'm back at it tonight. I like Tampa Bay Buccaneers as we're recording this on Monday. We'll see if they can get it done. Upcoming weekend, lots of good games on the slate, but hey, we got NBA to bet again. You can get it on MVP title futures. Love the Suns at 30-1. That's such a good price. You can bet MVP. How about Luka Doncic, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's behind Jokic? I don't think that should be the case. Lots of stuff you can bet on as the NBA gets started. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Final segment here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us. Matt Moore alongside David Ramil. Make sure to check out Locked On Heat and Locked On Nuggets, as well as our new daily team newsletters at lockedondaily.com. All right, David. So the New Orleans Pelicans, this wasn't like a shock, but it surprised me a little bit. They reached an agreement with Trey Murphy per Shams Charania on Monday on a 4-year rookie scale extension worth $112 million. Murphy has really shined. He's been one of the best like impact plus minus guys in the league. He's a favorite of all of the intelligentsia in NBA online media circles. Really good player, and I'm one of those. Like I think Trey Murphy's awesome, but they've now committed money to Herb Jones and Trey Murphy. And then there's Brandon Ingram, who still doesn't have an extension and is still on the team. So my question for you, I mean, opening night for the Pels is Wednesday. The Pels clearly aren't going to get a deal done before the start of the season. I'm of the opinion that they need to make a trade of Brandon Ingram right now. Commit to Herb Jones, Herb as if he's British, Herb Jones and Trey Murphy right now. That core with DeJounte Murray and Zion Williamson, that can work. Buy in right now. Finish the project, Pelicans. I think Brandon Ingram's a good player. I just don't think he fits with this roster to optimize them. They need to make a trade. They're committed long-term on Herb and Trey, and they're not going to want to pay Herb and Trey and Ingram. I think they need a trade right now.
I could see that rationale. I mean, I don't know that the Pelicans are a kind of team that are built to win a championship this year, although I think they're better than a lot of people might expect them to be. Obviously, they've got some great talent on there, but I think that also feels a little rash. It's not like you're not going to get anything for Ingram, but I think he can still provide value. It probably has to be in a far reduced role. And I think that could lead to problems. That could lead to grumbling. It could lead to complaining via media, internally, players only meetings, these kinds of things. But that seems a little harsh to trade a player of his quality and his ability at this start of the season. If you were going to make that trade, you probably would have made it weeks ago. I don't know why you'd want to go into camp at the start of the season with him on the roster unless you want to keep him throughout the rest of the season. And I think that would be the case. Maybe you risk losing him for nothing at the end of the season, but that might work out to your advantage anyway. So you could probably get some value out of him, maybe get some blood out of that last stone there and see if you can make a deep playoff run. I don't know why you'd want to push for a trade right now. Like that seems like that would rock the boat too quickly at this point. And I know that's only the start of the season. You've got 80-something games left that you can kind of prove it and right the ship a little bit. But it just feels a little rash to make that trade at this point in time. Despite, and I agree with you, you should make that commitment to the young core. That's the guys that you're going to be paying. That's the ones that you want to play more often. But you can keep Ingram on this roster, albeit in a reduced role, and still get something out of him and be able to maximize that value while he's still there.
Yeah, and that's probably what they're going to do. It just seems like that. I also think that maybe this is a signal that we're just going to see more guys leaving free agency. Not to bring it back to your guy, but Jimmy Butler, obviously last year of a deal, going to be a free agent next summer. Maybe they're just going to write it out. Maybe we're going to see more of this, that the second apron is going to make it to where teams don't feel like they have to get returned because they're just trying to ease up on the salary. Like you don't want to trade Brandon Ingram for more because you do have to match the salary requirements and you're still going to face the problem of the second apron. It just means you have to cut more options. So it might be easier just to let him walk in order to be able to make sure that you're under the tax or under the apron first or second, if you're trying to avoid that. So maybe that's the answer here. I think also as we look at kind of around the landscape and we look at some of the other teams, I do think there are still teams that need a couple of moves that will probably benefit. I also think that we're going to see a lot more starting over the next 3 weeks, right? When teams start to get off to a start and it's like, oof, they really need something else. One of the questions I have is the Orlando Magic, where, they really double down on like defense. And I'm just like, guys, if your defense is not top 3, and I mean top 3, the offense is not going to be good enough probably to hold you up against expectations. You might be 45 wins, but it's going to be hard to get close to 50, which is where I think a lot of the expectations are if they don't find some sort of option on the trade market to improve offensively.
What is it that you think they would need to add? Somebody at the point guard position, a wing player? Who is going to be transforming that offense into a much more potent one?
I don't think you need to transform it. You just need to like reinforce it. You just need like the ability to have some offensive bursts. And to me, the player is CJ McCollum. He's going to the bench this season, veteran player, still a really good scorer, was really good for the Pelicans last year. I think he's a great fit. I think that you can run units with CJ McCollum and Jalen Suggs with KCP at the 3, and then one of Franz or Paolo sits for that stretch, and you play him next to a stretch 5, especially with Goga, and like that's an offensive lineup. I think that could actually work. But that's the type of player I think you got to be looking for, is whether it's CJ
Desperate to
McCollum.
blow up the Pelicans at this point. Like, I thought you were a big fan of what they were able to put together there. You just want to trade away 2 of their starters.
What I like is I like Point Zion with DeJounte, Trey, and Herb. That's
Right.
the core that I really like. And I like Jose Alvarado because he's just awesome. But they need a center, and they need more connectors. And they've lost some of that. And I think that that's a little bit of an issue. Like, I'm not as high on Dyson Daniels as everyone else is, but he does look awesome in preseason. And I think they have enough wing defenders. I don't think they're hurting for that. But hey, like, Dyson could have been a really useful player for them. And I think DeJounte overall is an upgrade. I believe DeJounte Murray is not as bad as he was the last 2 years with the Hawks. That's like a big part of this offseason, honestly. If you're looking at the total look at the league, is do you think DeJounte Murray was a problem with Atlanta or not? Because if you do, then Atlanta's going to be better and the Pels are going to be worse. And if you don't, the Hawks are going to be the same and the Pels could be better. But I do think that's part of that equation. Is there any other team that you think you can look at and say, like, they probably need to look for a trade?
It might feel like it's unnecessary given the acquisition of Towns, but I just still look at the Knicks, and given the recent injury to Precious Achiuwa, what's going on with Mitchell Robinson. Pat Riley spoke to reporters last week, and I hate to bring it back to something related, but he talked about what he likes about this current Heat iteration, et cetera. But also teams like in the Eastern Conference, when asked about, the rest of the teams here in the East improving and making these kinds of offseason moves, the idea of going all in, that there's always these teams every year that kind of view this with the need to push as many chips as possible to the center of the table and try to win as many games as possible. And the Knicks feel like they've done that. The acquisition of Bridges, Towns, et cetera, the way that they've revamped this roster. This is a team that is desperate for a championship. And I think they want to, at the very least, a very, very deep playoff run, something that they have not been able to experience in recent years. So given all that, you'd want to shore up this depth. You talked about it in the first segment. I think this is a team that you can question their depth, and that they're going to have injury issues with OG Anunoby, et cetera. There's going to be some problems down the road, and you want to be able to shore that up. I don't know if that deal is out there for them, but if you can find a player that might be able to help you eke out a few more wins here and there and kind of provide some spot minutes so that you don't burn the rest of your team down to the ground, I think that's probably going to behoove them as they go all in this season.
The last one I was going to kind of talk about is the Chicago Bulls, and this is just like a roster crunch problem. So Zach LaVine looks much, much better, and we'll see. Maybe he, craters out of the gate or gets injured again. That's been a problem with Zach, but he looks much better. Lonzo's able to play, and even if you're like, well, he's on, like, they got to be so cautious with his minutes. He can't play more than 15 a game. Okay. Kobe White, Josh Giddey, Ayo Dosunmu. Like, that is 5 players for 2 spots, and they are all really good. Like, I think those are all starting caliber guards in the Eastern Conference. I think those are all starter caliber guards, and probably a few Western Conference teams too. So I'm just going to be really curious to see, I just feel like if you've been promising Giddey, you believe in him and you want to expand his role. The problem is, I think Giddey is probably a little underrated at this point. He was really good in the back half of last season, but Zach LaVine's better than him. Lonzo Ball, when healthy, is better than him. Kobe White is better than him. Ayo Dosunmu is probably not, but I like Ayo a lot. I think his value is higher with his defensive upside. So I just feel like there's opportunity for them to, especially I think they can attach one of those guys to Vucevic and maybe be like, get off of that money, is use one of those players as the sweetener for a Vucevic deal to get someone to take that money off the books and free up time for some of the younger guys. But I look at this and I go, Zach LaVine, Lonzo Ball, Kobe White, Josh Giddey, Ayo Dosunmu. That's a great 5-man combo, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that's probably a little too good, and it's worth them looking around at some trade options.
the Chicago we're talking about. But there's possibilities out there. But a deal for Vooch just doesn't seem like it's going to manifest anytime soon. We know that Levine's been actively shopped for a while now. Again, I just don't think that's going to manifest unless he has a fantastic start to the season or avoids injury. And even then, I think you handle that with kid gloves. Obviously, it doesn't seem like there's a likely name among those, because those would be the ones that you'd want to trade more than anything else. And the rest are the guards you mentioned. You probably want to keep those on the roster despite the glut there. So I just don't know that a trade is going to manifest there. Like when I think of trades, especially at the start of the season, you're going to have a team that's going to have high expectations and isn't going to be able to get off the ground as easily or smoothly as they expect it to. And that's the one that kind of feels that pressure, especially a team, like I said, New York, that feels like they went all in this season, want to be able to maximize as many wins as possible. And if they don't get a good start to the season, they could start to feel a little itchy in the trigger finger when it comes to transactions. I don't know. Is there a team out west that you think might fit that mold as far as that they have high expectations and they want to be able to get off to a good start to kind of prove it? Is it Minnesota? Do they find a way to move Julius this early in the season, or they are more invested in him and being able to see what they can get until the trade deadline out of his production?
So Los Angeles Lakers.
Makes sense.
I
just don't know.
With the connection to Clutch Sports, who, by the way, represent Zach LaVine. Before we get out of here, I do want to ask you, what player will Heat fans delude themselves into thinking they can trade for this season?
I think they're broken. I'll be honest with you. We've done a lot. Yes, I think they're absolutely, like, they'll find it. They'll find it again next offseason, but that'll be right now. They're just all wondering whether or not Jimmy Butler gets traded. And I keep telling them, no, that's not going to happen. And yet they still believe. I mean, at this point, they've already written off a 24-year-old 20-point per game scorer in Tyler Hero. They don't believe in him being able to be a good player at any point soon. So I know you've written him off for years too. So I'm speaking to the choir here.
We did a segment a couple, I guess, last offseason, not this last offseason, but the year before, we ranked like Anthony Simons, Tyler Hero, and Tyrese Maxey. That one's fun to go back and revisit. All right. That's going to do it for Locked On NBA. Hope you guys are excited for opening night. It's opening night in the NBA. Make sure to check out all the great content across the Locked On Podcast Network. You can catch team-by-team episodes to get caught up on those squads. Also, check out our new newsletters. Make sure to subscribe at LockedOnDaily.com. For David Ramil, I'm Matt Moore. We'll see you guys again next time on Locked On NBA.